Hey everyone, it's Sarah, and today I have a totally different kind of video for you. I was recently asked by a subscriber to talk about powdery perfumes, but she wanted me more to talk about what notes are in perfumery that make a perfume powdery. So I've been wanting to do videos like this forever where we focus a little bit more on the materials and talking about different notes and things. And I also want to do some videos about the history of perfumery and how perfumery has evolved over the years. So I thought that would be a great opportunity for me to kind of start getting into more videos like this. So today we're going to be talking about the notes in perfumery that make perfumes powdery and the differences, the different types of powderiness. I've got a lot of these perfumes, but instead of pulling all the bottles out, I'll just pop pictures on the screen for you. It's funny because she does not like powdery notes in perfumes at all, so this is more something that she wanted so that she knows what to avoid. So hopefully this will be helpful, and I hope you guys enjoy, and I'm gonna jump right in. So there are quite a few notes in perfumery that make perfumes powdery. There is a good mixture of naturals and synthetics, and everything that we're gonna talk about today can either come in a natural form or a synthetic form, I believe. And the first note that we're going to talk about, and the most popular kind of powdery note that you will find in perfumery, is iris. So they use pretty much the entire flower in iris. There aren't actually that many perfumes on the market that smell like an actual iris flower. There are some out there, but that's usually not the part of the flower that they're using when they use iris. So I do have one perfume. I'm gonna butcher it. Every time I say this, I butcher it. I don't have it to show you, but again, I will pop a picture on the screen for you. It is a fragrance from Hermes and it is called Iris Ukiyo-e, I think is how you would say that. That is a perfume that is supposed to smell like more of like an iris flower rather than the iris root or iris butter, which is really called orris. So iris and orris can kind of be used a little bit interchangeably, or I should say you will see iris and orris used interchangeably. And I think it's just to keep the confusion down from fragrances that actually smell like iris, the flower, and then fragrances that smell like orris, the root. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with L'Oreal lipstick. I do have a few L'Oreal lipsticks in my collection, and if you smell them, they typically have an iris flower scent to them. A lot of times we just think of lipsticks as smelling perfumey, which they do, but L'Oreal is kind of famous for having an iris flower scent to their lipsticks, which I happen to adore. So orris is actually referring to the iris root. Orris root actually has a fragrance that is similar to violets. Violets is another flower that can kind of smell a little bit powdery. To me, in my opinion, violets don't smell nearly as powdery as iris does, but orris root does have a similar fragrance to violets. Orris root is actually used kind of interchangeably with iris and fragrance as well. So they're just two notes that go really, really well together. Kind of like another combination that I like to think of is jasmine and hedione. Jasmine obviously is the flower. Hedione is a synthetic molecule that smells very similar to jasmine, and so you will often see those two notes used together in perfumery, and it's kind of the same thing with orris and violet. So then we've got orris butter. And orris butter is actually a beautiful material. If you look it up, it just looks beautiful. Like you want to melt it and like smooth it all over you. And to use it in perfumery, you do have to melt it down. It is an actual butter. So what it is, it's actually a solid essential oil. It's got a slightly woody, fatty, so it's got like a butteriness to it. It's got a fatty quality to it. And it also smells similar to violets. It is very similar to orris root, but because it's made into a butter, it's got that oily, fatty quality to it, which gives it a butteriness. It does kind of have a slightly fruity undertone, kind of a slightly sweet floral. It's really warm, and it is slightly powdery smelling. It's more of kind of a fuzziness. The way that I get from orris butter the same kind of vibes that I get from ambrette. Ambrette is not a note that I would consider a powdery note, but you get the same kind of vibe from it. It's almost fuzzy smelling, and that's kind of what I get from Orris Butter, but Orris Butter is even like a step further than Ambrette because it's got a butteriness to it. It really does have a buttery quality to it. So it almost has like a fuzziness to it. But I do still want to refer to it as powdery because you will still have kind of a powdery experience with it. So Iris and Orris Butter are pretty much the most popular ingredients in fragrance that will make things powdery, but there are a lot of other things. I mentioned violets. Violet is another note that will definitely lend a powderiness to a fragrance. Perfect example of a kind of powdery violet is Guerlain Insolence. Guerlain Insolence is intensely sweet, so you definitely get this candied violet from it, but that is a very, very good example of a powdery violet fragrance. It almost smells like makeup. And Iris can also smell like makeup. So Juliet has, again, Lipstick Fever, or is it Replica that has lipstick on? One of them is Lipstick Fever and one of them is Lipstick On. Those are two makeup-y Iris fragrances. So you get a powderiness, but it's a makeup powdery. So another note that can be powdery in fragrance is rose. And I know a lot of us don't think powdery when we think rose, but rose can definitely be powdery. So I have a fragrance from More called Marshmallow, which is a little bit misleading. It's not a marshmallow fragrance, it's definitely a rose fragrance, but it is a very powdery rose fragrance. Another powdery rose is Ombre Rose from, I think the perfumer's name is Jean-Charles Brousseau. I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. Ombre Rose, that's a powdery rose fragrance. Even my Elie Saab Essence No. 1 Rose is slightly powdery, so you can definitely get some powdery roses. Another really good example of a powdery rose is Al Haramain Janoon Rose. That is a fragrance that I actually had to declutter because it was even too, I like powdery, but that one was even too powdery for me. Another kind of set of notes I would say that can lend powderiness to a fragrance are musks. The one that came to mind immediately when I thought about it was a Montal fragrance called Amber Musk. Amber is on this list as well, so this was kind of a double whammy. I believe it's a powdery amber and powdery musks in this one that make this such a powdery musk fragrance, but musks can definitely be powdery as well. Heliotrope. So heliotrope is definitely what I would consider a slightly powdery fragrance. I wouldn't say it's overly powdery because heliotrope has a really, really beautiful greenness to it. I have an oil from Sweet Essentials that's just like a single note heliotrope oil, and it's fresh. Yes, it's slightly powdery in that kind of almondy way, but it's also green. It's got this beautiful fresh greenness to it, and I love that. A perfect example of a powdery heliotrope fragrance is Reminiscence Heliotrope. So I do have that fragrance as well. That is a very powdery heliotrope fragrance. I think it's got almond with it as well, and that's another thing. You'll see heliotrope and almond used almost interchangeably. They're used together a lot because I think both notes really enhance each other. So almond is another powdery note. Most of the time, almond will lend a powderiness to fragrance. Think Hypnotic Poison, the almond in that is quite powdery. Acqua di Parma, Mandorlo di Sicilia, that had a beautiful powdery almond note in it. One of my favorite fragrances, My Insolence from Guerlain, it's got a beautiful, very slightly powdery almond to it. Most of the time, almond is a bit powdery and can be associated with powderiness. Another note that can lend a little bit of a powderiness to a fragrance is Apoponyx resin. So Apoponyx resin is also referred to as sweet myrrh, and not all myrrh is powdery. This is sweet myrrh, so it's a little bit different. The fragrance that I have in my collection that has a powdery sweet myrrh note in it is a fragrance from Be Layered, and it is called Mia's Blend. I think Mia's Blend is a clone of Jo Malone, Myrrh, and Tonka, and it's a beautiful kind of sweet, resinous, powdery fragrance. And I think that that's where the powderiness is coming from, is definitely that Apoponyx resin or the sweet myrrh. And then speaking of resins that can be powdery, definitely ambers. So amber is not, amber could be a video in itself because amber is not actually a note. Amber is more of like a fantasy note. Most of the time amber is like an amalgamation of several notes, and it can contain different things. Like I said, that's a whole video in itself. But I have a really great powdery amber called Michael Kors Sexy Amber. It is a very powdery amber, and not all ambers are powdery, but Sexy Amber is definitely powdery. And again, it just depends on what is used in the amber or to compose that particular amber as to whether it's going to be powdery or not. But quite a few ambers are slightly powdery. My Histoire de Parfum amber, my L'Artisan Perfumer amber, those both have a slight powderiness to them as well. So, and it's almost like, it's not, to me, in my opinion, it's not a baby powder powdery. It's more of like a dusty book powdery. It's like an old, I don't know, like an old dusty antique shop kind of powdery. It's a different kind of powdery, but it is a little bit powdery nonetheless. So I just wanted to end this by talking about some really, really popular powdery perfumes. Prada Infusion d'Iris is a very popular powdery perfume that I'm sure a lot of you have smelled. Glossier You is an incredibly popular kind of powdery fragrance. That one's got iris and musks in it, and it's a really beautiful skin light kind of powdery perfume. Again, Guerlain Insolence is an incredibly powdery violet perfume. A discontinued fragrance that is a powder bomb is Chloe Love or Love Chloe. Really, really beautiful, very long discontinued powdery fragrance. There are so many good powdery fragrances on the market, but if you're somebody that hates powder, here's a video. Hopefully you can click on it and figure out what to avoid in perfumery so that you don't get another powdery perfume that you hate. But anyways, you guys, I do hope that this was helpful for you. Let me know if you like videos like this, if there are any other notes you want me to dive into, if there are any other videos like this that you want me to make, just let me know. I will see how this one goes over. I don't know how this is gonna go over. I've never made a video like this ever, so we'll see how you guys like it. But either way, I do hope that it was helpful for you and that you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.